October 18, 2025. Police officers stood in the woods behind an abandoned middle school in southwest Philadelphia, staring down at what they had just uncovered. The anonymous tip had been specific. Look behind Ada H. Lewis Middle School. Dig near the tree line. And there, in a shallow grave barely concealed by dirt and leaves, they found human remains. DNA testing would confirm what investigators already suspected. 23-year-old Kada Scott, missing since October 4th, had been murdered and hidden where her killer hoped she'd never be found. Within hours, 29-year-old pharmacist Keon King would be charged with her murder. The evidence against him seemed overwhelming. His car had been spotted circling the crime scene. His phone had pinged near Kada's workplace the night she vanished. Surveillance footage showed two people moving a heavy object into those same woods. But here's what nobody expected. Investigators began asking questions about someone else. Another woman. Someone who had been in contact with Keon before the murder. Someone who might have known what happened to Kada before anyone else did. Someone whose involvement could change everything we thought we understood about this case. The investigation into Kada Scott's disappearance had focused almost entirely on Keon King from the beginning. The digital evidence, the surveillance footage, the timeline of events, all of it pointed toward him as the primary perpetrator. But as detectives dug deeper, as they analyzed phone records and interviewed witnesses, a pattern emerged that raised disturbing questions. Keon hadn't been alone in the days surrounding Kada's murder. He had been in frequent contact with women whose names kept appearing in unexpected places. Women who had information they shouldn't have had. Women whose stories didn't quite add up when investigators pressed them for details. And one woman in particular kept surfacing in ways that made detectives pause and reconsider everything they thought they knew. Before we dive deeper into this mystery, let us know where you're watching from by dropping your location in the comments. And if you're still here following every twist in this investigation, type "Justice for Kada" so we can see who's staying with us through this complex story. Cases like this need people paying attention to every detail. Kada Scott was 23 years old when she disappeared on October 4, 2025. She had graduated from Penn State University and returned to Philadelphia with dreams that seemed limitless. She worked in healthcare, providing care and support to patients who needed her expertise and compassion. She ran her own small business, demonstrating entrepreneurial spirit and independence. She designed fashion, expressing creativity through clothing and style. She competed in pageants, showcasing confidence and ambition. Friends described her as someone who lit up every room she entered, whose energy was infectious, whose future seemed brighter than most people. Twice her age. Kada had grown up in West Philadelphia, navigating the challenges and opportunities of urban life with determination and grace. Her family was tight-knit, with her aunt Bree White serving as a particularly influential figure. Bree wasn't just family, she was a mentor, a confidant, someone Kada trusted completely. The bond between them was strong enough that Bree's concerns about Kada's relationships carried significant weight. And in the weeks before Kada disappeared, Bree had become increasingly worried about someone in Kada's life. She had warned Kada to be careful, to watch who she trusted, to recognize when friendships might not be what they appeared. Bree described herself as a seer, someone who occasionally received intuitions or visions about future events. Whether you believe in such abilities or dismiss them as coincidence, what matters is that Bree had specific concerns about Kada's safety in the days before October 4th. She had expressed those concerns to family members. She had tried to warn Kada, and when Kada vanished, Bree's warnings would take on a haunting significance that nobody could ignore. Kada's life seemed full of promise and possibility. She had overcome obstacles, achieved goals, built relationships. She was young enough to still be discovering who she wanted to become, but mature enough to have already accomplished more than many people manage in a lifetime. The contrast between her vibrant existence and her sudden disappearance made the crime even more tragic. Kada wasn't someone living on society's margins, vulnerable and isolated. She was surrounded by friends, supported by family, engaged with her community. Yet somehow, on an October evening in Philadelphia, she crossed paths with someone who saw her not as a person deserving of life, but as a problem requiring elimination. Keon King was 21 years old when he turned himself into Philadelphia police on October 14, 2025. He was originally from Dover, Delaware, but had been moving through Philadelphia for months, staying at different addresses connected to different circles. On social media, King presented himself as a local rapper, someone making moves in the underground scene. His posts showed designer clothes, stacks of cash, and the 1999 gold Toyota Camry that would later become central evidence in a kidnapping investigation. The image was carefully constructed, charismatic, confident, connected. The reality was something else entirely. King maintained multiple fake social media accounts under different names. He used these profiles to approach women he didn't know, offering them money, rides, opportunities to connect. The tactic was calculated. Approach under one identity, build trust, then shift the interaction before the target realized who he actually was. King wasn't a complete stranger to Kada. He was from the area, a familiar face in the neighborhood. People called him the neighborhood pharmacist, a street term that suggested he was involved in activities that had nothing to do with legitimate pharmaceutical work. It's possible Kada had seen him around, maybe nodded hello in passing, never realizing he was studying her movements, learning her schedule, waiting for the right moment. Keon had a history that raised red flags for anyone who looked closely. He had previous legal encounters, including allegations related to kidnapping. The details of those prior incidents remain somewhat unclear from public records, but the fact that kidnapping allegations had surfaced before Kada's disappearance suggested a pattern. This wasn't someone who simply snapped one night in an uncharacteristic moment of violence. This was someone who had demonstrated concerning behavior before, someone who had experience with the legal system, someone who knew how investigations worked and might have planned accordingly. Keon's relationship with Kada had developed through mutual social circles. They knew each other, had spent time together, had a level of familiarity that allowed Kada to trust him enough to be alone with him. That trust would prove fatal. Exactly what their relationship consisted of, whether romantic, friendly, or something more complicated, remains part of the investigation's ongoing questions. What we know is that on October 4, 2025, Kada and Keon were together, and by the end of that night, Kada was dead. But Keon didn't exist in isolation. He had relationships, connections, people who knew him and interacted with him regularly. And among those people was a woman whose role in this case would become increasingly scrutinized as investigators pieced together what happened. Her name was Gabby. Gabby occupied a unique position in this story. She lived in Kada's neighborhood. She was also in contact with Keon. She existed at the intersection of victim and perpetrator, connected to both, trusted by both, positioned to potentially know things that others might not. In the days and weeks following Kada's disappearance, Gabby's actions and statements would draw intense attention from both investigators and the public. From the beginning, Gabby maintained that she had nothing to do with Kada's disappearance or death. She didn't want to talk to the police at first, but she later cooperated with police, answered questions, provided information about her friendship with Kada, and her interactions with Keon. She appeared on social media, addressing rumors and speculation, defending herself against accusations from people who believed she knew more than she was saying. She explained why she didn't come out to the police after Keon had turned himself in. But investigators noticed inconsistencies. Phone records showed calls between Gabby and Keon on dates that seemed significant to the timeline. Witnesses reported seeing Gabby at locations that intersected with the investigation. Most troubling, someone close to Gabby allegedly stated in a text message that Kada was dead before police had made any public announcement about finding remains. How could Gabby or her friends know Kada was dead when authorities hadn't yet confirmed it? What information was circulating in certain circles before it reached official channels? The timeline of Kada's final day began with seemingly normal activities. She went to work at her healthcare job, interacting with patients and colleagues as usual. She made plans for later, sent text messages to friends, lived her day without any apparent awareness that danger was approaching. But by evening, something changed. At 10:07 p.m. on October 4th, Kada sent a text message that would later seem prophetic. "Kidnap me again." 2 minutes later, at 10:09 p.m., she sent another message. CM. Those messages have been analyzed extensively by investigators and armchair detectives alike. "Kidnap me again," suggested prior experience with kidnapping, possibly referencing Keon's history or a previous incident between them. Was it a joke? A flirtation? A coded warning? The message's meaning remains debated. CM could be initials, an abbreviation, or a reference understood only by the recipient. Without knowing who received these messages, or what they meant in context, they remain cryptic clues rather than clear evidence. What we know with certainty is that by 10:15 p.m., phone data placed Kada and Keon together near her workplace. Their devices pinged off the same cell towers, indicating physical proximity. Surveillance footage from the area would later show Kada's black Hyundai Accent entering the parking lot of her workplace at 10:28 p.m. The car would remain there, abandoned and untouched, for more than 36 hours. Kada would never be seen alive again. The investigation that followed would uncover a chilling sequence of events. On October 5th and 6th, surveillance cameras captured a gold Toyota Camry, registered to Keon King, circling Kada's workplace repeatedly. The vehicle appeared to be monitoring the area, checking whether the abandoned Hyundai had attracted attention. Then, cameras at Ada H. Lewis Middle School, an abandoned building in southwest Philadelphia, recorded footage that would become central to the prosecution's case. The footage showed two figures moving through the darkened grounds of the abandoned school. They carried something heavy, something that required both of them to manage its weight. They moved toward the wooded area behind the school, disappearing from camera view. Later searches of that area would uncover items that told a disturbing story: work gloves, a hammer, contractor-grade trash bags, ammunition. And eventually, in a shallow grave barely 100 yards from where the surveillance footage ended, police would find Kada's remains, two figures. The footage clearly showed two people working together to transport and conceal the body. Keon King was one, but who was the other? The camera angle, lighting conditions, and distance made definitive identification impossible. Investigators knew someone had helped Keon, but determining who required assembling evidence from multiple sources. On October 7th, Kada's Hyundai Accent was found burned, the fire severe enough to destroy potential forensic evidence inside the vehicle. Someone had tried to eliminate any traces that might link Keon or his accomplice to the car where Kada had likely been killed or held after death. The attempt to destroy evidence suggested planning, premeditation, awareness of how investigations worked. This wasn't an impulsive crime of passion followed by panic. This was calculated murder followed by methodical cover-up. The calls between Gabby and Keon during this period raised questions. Phone records showed they spoke on October 9th, a 5-day gap after Kada's disappearance. The call lasted approximately 2 minutes before ending abruptly. What did they discuss? Was Keon checking on Gabby as a concerned friend? Was he asking her about Kada? Or were they coordinating something? Stories, alibis, next steps. On October 14th, Keon King turned himself in to Philadelphia police. His attorney had arranged the surrender, and Keon was initially charged with kidnapping and related offenses. He was released on bail, though prosecutors would later seek to revoke that bail as the investigation uncovered evidence of murder. The voluntary surrender was presented by Keon's defense team as evidence of innocence, an innocent man cooperating with authorities. Prosecutors saw it differently, a calculated move by someone who knew arrest was inevitable and wanted to control the circumstances. 4 days later, on October 18th, police received an anonymous tip directing them to the abandoned school. The specificity of the tip, location, approximate depth, landmarks to look for, suggested the caller had direct knowledge of where Kada's body had been buried. Who made that call? Why did they wait nearly 2 weeks before contacting police? Did guilt motivate the tip or strategy? Investigators traced the call but never publicly identified the source. The mystery caller remained anonymous, protected by policies designed to encourage tips without fear of exposure. When police discovered Kada's remains, The medical examiner determined her death was a homicide. The cause of death wasn't immediately released to the public, but investigators made clear they were now pursuing murder charges. Keon King was rearrested and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, abuse of corpse, tampering with evidence, arson, and weapons offenses. The list of charges reflected the complexity and premeditation prosecutors saw in the crime. This wasn't a simple murder. It was a calculated execution followed by elaborate attempts to hide the evidence. If you're finding this case as compelling and important as we do, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others who need to understand how these crimes unfold. Awareness protects communities. Knowledge helps us recognize warning signs. Together, we can ensure cases like Kada's receive the attention they deserve, and that justice reaches everyone involved. Not just the obvious suspect, but anyone who helped, anyone who knew, anyone who stayed silent when speaking up might have saved a life. As investigators built their case against Keon King, they encountered evidence suggesting he hadn't acted alone. The surveillance footage showing two people at the burial site was the most obvious indicator. But there were others. Witnesses reported seeing Keon with various women in the days surrounding the murder. Phone records showed communications with multiple female contacts during the relevant time period. And then there were the two women briefly detained by police at a Southwest Philadelphia residence. Those detentions generated significant speculation. Who were these women? What was their connection to Keon? Why were they at that particular residence? Police released them without charges after questioning, leaving the public to wonder what information they had provided and why authorities determined they weren't accomplices. Were they genuinely uninvolved, or did they provide cooperation that made prosecution unnecessary? Were they witnesses, or were they participants in aspects of the crime that prosecutors couldn't prove beyond reasonable doubt? Gabby's situation became increasingly complicated as the investigation progressed. She maintained her innocence throughout, insisting she was a victim herself, someone who had lost a neighbor, someone being unfairly targeted by speculation and accusation. She used social media to defend herself, to share her perspective, to grieve publicly. She live-streamed emotional reactions to developments in the case. She engaged with commenters who both supported and attacked her. But the questions persisted. If Gabby was innocent, why had her friends state that Kada was missing and dead before police announced finding remains? How did information about Kada's death circulate in certain social circles before becoming public knowledge? Had Keon told Gabby what he'd done? Had someone else told her? Or had she been present when it happened, not as a participant, but as a witness who stayed silent? The legal distinction between participation and knowledge matters enormously. Someone who helps plan or execute a murder faces the same charges as the person who commits the killing. Someone who witnesses a murder or learns about it afterward and says nothing may face lesser charges, obstruction, accessory after the fact, or no charges at all if prosecutors can't prove they had specific knowledge. Gabby's legal jeopardy depended on what prosecutors could prove about what she knew, when she knew it, and what actions she took based on that knowledge. Investigators also explored whether jealousy or romantic rivalry might have motivated an accomplice. Kada was beautiful, was successful, magnetic. She attracted attention, both wanted and unwanted. If someone close to Keon had romantic feelings for him, if they viewed Kada as competition or a threat, if they believed Kada had somehow wronged Keon, they might have been willing to help eliminate what they perceived as an obstacle. Murder driven by romantic obsession isn't rare. Women who kill or help kill other women in service of relationships with men appear frequently in criminal case files. Did Gabby have romantic feelings for Keon? Had she been involved with him in ways that created resentment toward Kada? The public didn't have access to enough information to answer those questions definitively. But investigators certainly would have explored that angle. They would have reviewed messages between Gabby and Keon. They would have interviewed mutual friends about the nature of their relationship. They would have looked for evidence of jealousy, possessiveness, or romantic entanglement that might explain why someone would help commit murder. Another theory investigators likely considered involved multiple layers of involvement. Perhaps Keon killed Kada alone, but then enlisted help disposing of the body. Perhaps Gabby or another woman wasn't present for the murder itself, but agreed to help afterward, driving vehicles, destroying evidence, creating alibis. That scenario would explain the surveillance footage showing two people at the burial site while potentially exonerating the accomplice of the actual killing. From a legal perspective, helping dispose of a body still carries serious charges. But psychologically, someone might rationalize that helping after the fact is different from participating in murder itself. The Philadelphia community reacted to Kada's murder with grief, anger, and fear. Vigils were held throughout the city, with hundreds of people gathering to mourn a young woman whose life had been stolen. Social media exploded with tributes, theories, and demands for justice. The city council held hearings about the Ada H. Lewis Middle School, with members calling for the abandoned building to be demolished. It had become a symbol of urban decay and criminal opportunity, a place where predators could commit crimes hidden from view. Kada's family spoke publicly about their loss and their determination to see justice served. Aunt Bree, whose warnings before the murder had seemed almost prophetic, became a spokesperson for the family's grief. She described Kada's vibrant personality, her dreams and ambitions, the future that had been taken from her. And she expressed confidence that everyone involved, not just Keon King, but anyone who had helped him, would eventually face consequences. The family's statements made clear they believed others were involved. They didn't name names publicly, likely on advice from prosecutors who didn't want witnesses influenced by media attention. But they made plain their conviction that Keon hadn't acted alone, that someone had helped him kill Kada or cover up her murder, and that person or persons also bore responsibility for what happened. The investigative files on Kada's case contained thousands of pages of documentation, phone records showing calls and texts between dozens of people in the days surrounding her death, surveillance footage from multiple locations throughout Philadelphia, forensic reports analyzing evidence recovered from the burial site, the burned car, and other locations, witness statements describing interactions with Keon, Gabby, and others, search warrants executed at residences, vehicles, and workplaces, financial records tracking purchases of items used in the crime, trash bags, accelerants, cleaning supplies. Buried in those documents were connections that investigators flagged as significant. Purchases made from stores near where certain women lived. Phone calls placed from locations where those women worked. Surveillance footage showing vehicles associated with those women in areas relevant to the investigation. None of this evidence was conclusive by itself, but taken together, it created a pattern suggesting that Keon had received help from someone, that the help had been substantial, and that investigators had identified potential suspects even if they hadn't yet filed charges. The digital evidence proved particularly revealing. When people commit crimes, they often forget how much of their lives exists in digital form. Every phone call creates a record. Every text leaves a trail. Every social media post, every email, every GPS-enabled app tracking their location. All of it generates data that investigators can access with proper warrants. Keon's phone had been searched extensively, but so had phones belonging to people in his social circle, including women who had been in contact with him before and after October 4th. What did those searches reveal? Prosecutors haven't released complete details, likely protecting evidence for trial. But court filings hint at communications that contradict public statements made by potential witnesses. Messages that show awareness of events they later claimed ignorance about. Deleted conversations that forensic analysis partially recovered. Location data, placing people at relevant locations at relevant times, despite claims they were elsewhere. One particularly damaging piece of evidence involved the timing of when certain people learned about Kada's death. The official announcement came on October 18th, when police confirmed they had found human remains and identified them as Kada Scott. But investigators discovered that some people had been discussing Kada's death days earlier. How did they know? Who told them? And why was that information circulating in certain circles before becoming public? If Gabby's friend knew Kada was dead before October 18th, that friend learned from someone. Either they were present when Kada died, or someone who was present told them, or they heard it from someone in the Chain of information spreading outward from the crime. Tracing that information chain backward could identify who had direct knowledge of the murder. If that chain led to Gabby, if investigators could prove she knew specifics about Kada's death before police announced finding the body, that knowledge would be extremely difficult to explain without admitting either presence at the crime or communication with someone who was there. Defense attorneys representing anyone accused of involvement in Kada's murder would face challenging circumstances. The evidence against Keon appeared strong: phone records, surveillance footage, forensic evidence, witness testimony. Defending him would require attacking the reliability of that evidence or proposing alternative explanations for his presence at relevant locations. But defending an alleged accomplice presented different challenges. How do you explain away phone calls with the primary suspect during relevant time periods? How do you account for knowledge of the victim's death before police announced it? How do you reconcile public statements of innocence with digital evidence suggesting otherwise? The legal strategies available to potential accomplices included cooperation agreements. If prosecutors believed someone had helped Keon but viewed that person as less culpable, perhaps they helped dispose of the body but weren't present for the murder itself, they might offer reduced charges in exchange for testimony against Keon. Such deals happen frequently in cases involving multiple perpetrators. Prosecutors prioritize convicting the primary defendant and may accept lesser charges against accomplices if those accomplices provide testimony that strengthens the case. Had anyone accepted such a deal? Had prosecutors approached Gabby or other women with offers to testify in exchange for immunity or reduced charges? The public doesn't know. These negotiations typically happen behind closed doors, in prosecutors' offices, and defense attorneys' conference rooms. Only when cooperation agreements are formalized and become part of court filings does the public learn who has flipped, who has agreed to testify, who has purchased leniency by helping convict others. The possibility that Gabby or another woman might testify against Keon created tension in Philadelphia's social media conversations about the case. People who believed Gabby was involved saw potential testimony as self-serving lies designed to avoid prosecution. People who believed she was innocent saw cooperation as brave truth-telling despite personal risk. Without knowing what actually happened, observers projected their assumptions onto incomplete information, creating narratives that matched their existing beliefs. The psychological impact of Kada's murder extended beyond her immediate family and friends. Young women throughout Philadelphia felt the story's resonance: a successful, educated, careful woman killed by someone she knew and trusted. If Kada could be murdered despite all her advantages and precautions, what did that mean for everyone else? How do you protect yourself when danger comes from familiar faces rather than strangers? Community activists used Kada's case to highlight ongoing concerns about violence against women. They organized marches and awareness campaigns. They pushed for better street lighting near the abandoned school where Kada was found. They demanded more resources for missing persons investigations. They called for policies requiring faster action when women report feeling unsafe or threatened by people in their lives. Kada's story also sparked conversations about friend betrayal. If indeed Gabby or another woman had been involved, what did that say about female friendship? How do you navigate relationships when people you trust might be capable of participating in violence? These questions resonated particularly with women who had experienced betrayal, friends who turned on them, relationships that ended in ways that revealed hidden malice, social circles where supposed allies proved anything but. The racial dynamics of the case also merited attention. Kada was a black woman. Keon was a black man. Gabby and other women involved in the social circle were black. The case unfolded in predominantly black neighborhoods of Philadelphia. Media coverage had to balance reporting accurately with avoiding stereotypes or narratives that perpetuate harmful assumptions about black communities and violence. Kada's accomplishments, university education, business ownership, professional success, made her story particularly tragic. She represented everything society claims to want from young people: education, ambition, entrepreneurship, community engagement. Yet none of that protected her when she encountered someone willing to kill. Her death demonstrated that no amount of personal achievement insulates you from violence when you cross paths with the wrong person at the wrong time. The trial of Keon King, when it eventually happens, will likely attract significant media attention. Philadelphia residents will want answers about what happened to Kada. Journalists will analyze testimony, expert presentations, and forensic evidence. True crime enthusiasts will dissect every detail. And everyone will watch closely to see whether prosecutors introduce evidence of an accomplice, whether anyone testifies against Keon in exchange for immunity, whether the mystery of who helped him gets resolved. Jury selection will be critical. Pre-trial publicity has been extensive. Finding 12 people who haven't formed opinions about Keon's guilt or Gabby's potential involvement will challenge both sides. Attorneys will question potential jurors extensively about media consumption, social media engagement, preconceptions about the case. They'll seek people who can evaluate evidence objectively, despite months of news coverage and online speculation. The prosecution's case will likely follow the timeline we've discussed. They'll establish that Kada and Keon were together October 4th. They'll present phone data placing them at her workplace. They'll show surveillance footage of the abandoned Hyundai, the gold Camry circling the area, and most devastatingly, 2 figures moving a heavy object into the woods where Kada's body was found. They'll introduce forensic evidence, gloves, hammer, trash bags, ammunition, and connect it to Keon through purchases, fingerprints, or other physical evidence. They'll present the burned car as attempted evidence destruction, and they'll walk the jury through every step that led from Kada's last text messages to the discovery of her remains. The defense will attack each element. They'll question whether phone data really proves Keon and Kada were together or just that their phones were near each other. They'll argue surveillance footage shows figures but doesn't definitively identify Keon. They'll challenge forensic conclusions and chain of custody for evidence. They'll propose alternative explanations for Keon's gold Camry appearing near relevant locations. And they'll likely suggest that if 2 people were involved in disposing of the body, the second person might be the actual killer while Keon was simply present or helped afterward under duress. Whether prosecutors call an accomplice as a witness will depend on what deals they've made and how essential that testimony is to their case. If they have enough evidence to convict Keon without accomplice testimony, they might prefer not to put someone on the stand who defense attorneys can attack as a liar trading testimony for leniency. But if accomplice testimony fills critical gaps, explaining what happened between Kada's last texts and her death, describing who did what at the burial site, providing direct evidence of premeditation, prosecutors might decide the benefits outweigh the risks. If Gabby or another woman takes the stand, that testimony will be the trial's most dramatic moment. Prosecutors will walk the witness through their connection to Keon, their knowledge of Kada, their actions before and after October 4th. They'll seek admissions about phone calls, locations, knowledge of the crime. Defense attorneys will then cross-examine mercilessly, attacking credibility, highlighting inconsistencies, emphasizing the witness's own legal jeopardy and motivation to lie in exchange for favorable treatment. The jury will have to decide whether to believe someone who may have participated in crimes but now claims to be telling the truth. Regardless of whether accomplice testimony appears, the question of who helped Keon will hover over the trial. Jurors will see surveillance footage of 2 people. They'll wonder who the second person was. They'll expect prosecution to answer that question. If prosecutors can't or won't identify the accomplice, defense attorneys will use that gap to create doubt. They'll argue that the real killer might be the unidentified second person. That reasonable doubt exists because someone involved in these events hasn't been charged or identified. The case also raises broader questions about accomplice liability and moral culpability. If someone helped dispose of Kada's body but wasn't present for the murder, should they face the same charges as the killer? Should someone who knew about the crime afterward and stayed silent be prosecuted? Where do we draw lines between criminal participation and moral failure? Legal systems struggle with these questions. Accomplice liability doctrines vary by jurisdiction. Some states charge everyone involved in a felony with murder if someone dies during that felony, regardless of who actually killed the victim. Other states distinguish more carefully between principals and accessories, between those who participated directly and those who helped after the fact. Michigan law, governing jurisdiction for Kada's case, allows prosecution of accomplices, but requires proving they knew about and intended to assist the criminal act. For someone who helped Keon dispose of Kada's body, prosecutors would need to prove they knew Kada was dead, understood they were concealing a murder, and voluntarily participated in that concealment. If the person believed they was helping move something other than a body, or if Keon coerced her participation through threats, their culpability might be reduced. Defense attorneys would emphasize any evidence suggesting their client didn't fully understand what they were doing or acted under duress. But public opinion often lacks patience for such legal nuances. Many people believe that anyone who helped hide a murder victim's body shares responsibility for the murder itself. They see no meaningful distinction between killing someone and helping the killer avoid prosecution. From that perspective, identifying and prosecuting every accomplice becomes essential to justice. Letting anyone involved escape consequences feels like failure. The answer to whether another woman was involved in Kada Scott's murder remains officially unresolved. Investigators clearly believe someone helped Keon. The surveillance footage proves it. But identifying that person publicly and charging them requires meeting high evidentiary standards. Prosecutors must have proof beyond reasonable doubt. They must be confident they can convince 12 jurors. And they must weigh whether pursuing accomplice charges serves justice or simply satisfies public demands for additional defendants. If a woman is eventually charged, this case will take on new dimensions. The trial will expand to include multiple defendants with potentially conflicting defenses. Media coverage will intensify. Community reaction will be even more charged. And the legal proceedings will stretch over longer periods as each defendant receives their day in court. If no additional charges are filed, questions will linger. People will wonder whether someone escaped. Justice. Investigators will continue working the case, looking for evidence that might support charging accomplices. Whistleblowers or witnesses with guilty consciences might come forward years later with information that reopens investigations. Cold case techniques might extract new evidence from materials preserved from the original investigation. What cases would you like us to investigate next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. Should we examine unsolved mysteries where justice hasn't yet arrived? Explore cases where wrongful convictions destroyed innocent lives? Analyze psychological profiles of killers who operated for years before being caught? Subscribe to this channel so you never miss our investigations into cases that need attention. Like this video if you appreciate the depth and detail we bring to these stories. Share it with anyone who needs to understand how crimes like this unfold and how communities can protect themselves. Thank you for joining us in demanding answers, seeking truth, and never forgetting victims like Kada Scott whose lives were stolen, but whose memories we can honor, by ensuring their stories reach everyone who needs to hear them. Kada Scott, 23 years old, was full of promise, stolen from a world that needed her energy and talents. Keon King stands accused of her murder, facing trial and potential life imprisonment. And somewhere, perhaps watching these proceedings, perhaps reading about the investigation, perhaps feeling guilt or fear or relief at remaining unnamed, is the person who helped him. The person who held one end of the weight they carried into those woods. The person who knew what had happened and said nothing while Kada's family searched desperately for answers. The person whose identity might be known to investigators but not yet provable to a jury. The person who, if justice truly prevails, will eventually answer for their role in this tragedy. Until that day comes, until every question is answered and every person responsible faces consequences, Kada's case reminds us that evil often requires cooperation. Predators like Keon King operate with assistance from people who enable, facilitate, or cover up their crimes. Breaking the chains of that cooperation, making accomplices understand they will be caught, that staying silent won't protect them, that helping a killer makes you complicit in murder, might prevent the next tragedy. Because somewhere tonight, in Philadelphia or any other city, someone knows something about a crime they haven't reported. Someone is helping someone else escape consequences. And someone who could be saved if that accomplice came forward instead continues toward danger they don't see coming. Kada deserved better. She deserved to live, to achieve her dreams, to grow old surrounded by people who loved her. She deserved a justice system that prevents murders rather than only prosecuting them afterward. She deserved a society where helping killers is unthinkable, rather than an option people consider. And she deserves a resolution to her case that holds everyone involved accountable, that answers every question her family has, that ensures her death leads to some measure of prevention for future potential victims. The investigation continues. The trial approaches. And the question of who else was involved remains central to both the legal proceedings and the public's understanding of how Kada Scott was murdered and why that murder succeeded for as long as it did. Justice delayed is justice denied. But justice incomplete, holding some accountable while others escape, is justice betrayed. Kada deserves complete justice, and we must continue demanding it until we know with certainty that everyone who played any role in her death has answered for their actions. Thanks for being part of our community. Your support means a lot. By clicking the subscribe button, you'll enjoy exclusive perks and premium content. This channel keeps thriving all thanks to viewers like you.